Good morning, everyone. Because I've been out a lot. Yes, Good morning, everyone. My name is Quarles-Mowrer, and I'd like to welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Pottstown. Welcome to all of you who are joining us in our lovely sanctuary this morning. Welcome to all of you who are joining us on Zoom, and welcome to all of you who are joining us sometime in the future on YouTube. With all the choices we have for our time on a weekly, daily, minutely basis, I'm so glad you chose to be with us. For over 50 years, the UFP has been a liberal religious voice in the Pottstown area. As UUs, we believe that there's never too much time to learn and explore, and we can learn and explore for your whole life. So we believe that that is open to everyone, no matter what, no matter where you're from, no matter who you are, no matter how you were born. Everybody gets a chance to learn and ask questions. So we hope that your spirit and your heart and your mind are refreshed this morning as we explore the principle of acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth. We come together this Sunday morning and every Sunday morning, not because we share a creed, but because we promise each other that we will support one another on our spiritual journey. Our services are really different, but as I always say, and I know you guys are probably hearing me say this for the millionth time, the loving kindness that we hold in this building is always the same. So whoever you are, wherever you're from, wherever you're going, whoever you love, we are so glad you came to be with us today. So now it is time for announcements. If anyone has an announcement, please come on up to the front and use the microphone. I'm not like looking at myself walking backwards up here in the camera. Hi, my name is Monica Buckley. I'm the board president. I just want to make a quick announcement. Due to insurance reasons, we've changed our cleaning service. So we've had a new cleaning service. It's Paul's Healthy Living. Sam and I will be available after service today. If anyone wants to ask us questions about that, we'll be in here for about 10 minutes. So feel free to stay back and we can talk about it more. So thank you so much.
Right, 2 quick announcements, everybody. We had our first community concert circle, and we had a bunch of friends and some kids joining us for the Three Feathers. And I will say it was actually the most fun I've ever had in an opera. You saw some like raising the roof up here. I love that my kids' first experience with opera was like, wow, that was really fun. And they said, are all operas like that? And I said, but it was very fun. It was nice and short. So if you ever do get the opportunity, and it runs about 50 minutes, it was very fun and children friendly. Just a quick note, we do have this beautiful center spread here in the Sojourner with the upcoming concerts. Kim probably laid this out, it's beautiful. And the next one is going to be Sunday, December 14th at 4 p.m. And that's the Pennsylvania Flute Choir. And I've always wanted to see the flute choir. I don't know if you know, there's things that are called bass flutes, there's alto flutes. So it's flutes of all shapes, sizes, and descriptions. So please join us for that. And then I have a second announcement. Last week, I went ahead and made a team for us within the American Red Cross app. I think I've been talking about my platelet donations, and my goal this year is to find at least one more person to donate platelets. No pressure on any one person, but let me know when I talk about it. But if you do ever or have ever donated to the Red Cross, you can join the UUFP team. And it's not personal, but it will actually aggregate all of our contributions and show how many lives we've touched with our donations. So there will be a note in next month's Sojourner about that. But if you'd like to join, you can also let me know, and I can text you the invitation for that. So music and blood.
Okay. And I got this idea and I was so excited about it, about restarting the walking club, which we had during COVID, and it was just great. And I thought, well, this is wonderful. I'll do this on my day off. And then the next day I thought, maybe someone else might want to do this. So if anyone wants to start, continue the walking club, it was great. You know, you can, I mean, you don't have to talk about UUFP things. You can just enjoy the weather, and it's getting so cold out, and you bundle up and take a walk with other UUFPs and friends. So if anybody is interested in manning that, contact me. Thanks.
I'm Judith. Some of you may know I'm also a Red Cross volunteer. We have a free program that will come into your home and install free smoke detectors. So if anybody's interested in that, they're free. We come in, we put them up. There's a 10-year lithium ion battery in them. So no changing batteries every year. Just let me know. I'll give you the phone number to call.
All right. Well, this morning, Claudia is going to help us light the challenge. We'll light our chalice this morning with the words by Pat Levy. Our chalice is a reminder that in hard times, our ancestors in faith acted with courage to bring hope and safety, to bring light itself to threatened people. We light it today as a reminder of who we are called to be in a world that is still dangerous and despairing. With courage and faith, we bring ourselves to the work before. Thank you so much. And now is the time when we come to our chime. This is the time where we take stock of where we are and who we're with, and being in a room together. And we silence our devices that can keep us apart. Even actually, I was again at a dinner with teenagers yesterday, and they were all sitting together, like texting each other. You're less than like 3 inches away, not even 3 feet away, 3 inches away in this booth. I guess mom wasn't supposed to know what they were talking about. I don't know. So now that we've silenced our devices, let's take a second, sit more firmly into our chair. Feel the way that your body settles into gravity. Feel the way that your spine lifts towards the sky. Feel the way that the air moves into your lungs with each inhale. And the relaxation of your ribs as you exhale. And take a moment to listen to the sound of the chime. For opening words this morning, we have the words of Monica Jacobson Tennyson. What is it that calls you here? That calls you onward? That calls you inward? That leads you homeward? What is it that gives you the power to make that change, to ask that question, to take that journey? What is it that gives you the courage to say that you have done well, that asks you to learn more, that brings you to stillness and holds you up in hard times? It is relationship. It is the beating heart of our faith. It begins when we share this hour, when we share our truths, When we share this air, when we share our hearts, come, let us worship together. We're going to start this morning with hymn number 123, Spirit of Life. So if you're young in body or in spirit, you're welcome to come on up to the front and sit down and listen to the story. This is a story you guys may have heard before. It's called She Persisted, and it was written by Chelsea Clinton. And it's about 13 American women who changed the world. And what we're talking about today is we are talking about Olympia Brown, who was the first minister of any faith in the entire US who was female. She was the first one to be ordained. Oh, and look, nachos. So this was inspired by Senator Elizabeth Warren and in celebration of all women who persist every day. Sometimes being a girl isn't easy. At some point, someone will probably tell you no, will tell you to be quiet, and may even tell you your dreams are impossible. But don't listen. These 13 American women certainly did not take no for an answer. They persisted. Harriet Tubman was born a slave, and her story could have ended there. Yeah, thank you. And her story could have ended there. Instead, she persisted, escaping from slavery and becoming the most famous conductor on the Underground Railroad. She risked her life many times to lead countless slaves to freedom, including her family, her friends, and strangers. Every person she led to freedom arrived safe. Can you imagine that? Every person. She didn't lose anybody. Once Helen Keller became blind and deaf as a toddler, few people thought that she'd be able to learn to read or write or even speak, but she persisted. Helen learned how to do all three and not only became the first person with deaf blindness to graduate from college, but she used her story to help fight for more opportunities for people with disabilities in the United States and around the whole world. After her family fled poverty and the threat of violence in Ukraine for a new home in New York, Quarles-Mowrer got a job working at a garment factory. She wrote that the factory conditions made women into machines, and so she persisted. She organized picket lines and strikes that ultimately helped better pay and shorter hours and safer working conditions for thousands of women and men. Nellie Bly became a reporter in part because a mail writer said that working women were a monstrosity. And she wanted to prove that women could do anything. At times putting her safety at risk, she persisted throughout her career, exposing real monstrosity, pretending to be a sweatshop worker and a patient in a mental hospital to show how badly people were treated. Inspired from an early age by her brother's childhood illness, Virginia Apgar, anybody heard of her before? Virginia Apgar determined to be a doctor long before many girls were allowed to have such dreams. Bless you. Even though she qualified to be a surgeon, the male head surgeon at her hospital discouraged her because she was a woman. Nevertheless, she persisted, becoming an anesthesiologist and creating the Apgar score to test a newborn baby's health, which hospitals still use today. Maria Tallchief's family moved to California, partly to support Maria's dreams of becoming a dancer. Well, she was teased by students in school for her Native American heritage, and later was encouraged to change her last name to something that sounded Russian, since many professionals at the time were from Russia. Well, she persisted, ignoring all the taunting and poor advice to become the first great American Indian prima ballerina. As a 15-year-old riding a bus home from school in Montgomery, Alabama, Claudette Holden was expected to give up her seat to a white woman just because she was African American. In her refusal to get up, she persisted in taking a stand for what's right, helping to inspire Rosa Parks to make the choice 9 months later, an act that's pointed to as starting the modern civil rights movement. When Ruby Bridges was in kindergarten, many schools across America, particularly in the South, refused African American students their equal right to an education. Well, Ruby would be treated like a second-class student, and she persisted, walking for weeks past angry, hateful protesters to integrate an all-white elementary school in New Orleans. As the first woman to serve as both a U.S. representative and a U.S. senator, Margaret Chase Smith couldn't let that fact alone be her legacy. Instead, she persisted in championing women's rights and more opportunities for women in the military, standing up for free speech and supporting space exploration. She was the head of NASA, as the head of NASA once noted, that without her, we would not have put a man on the moon. Well, Sally Ride, she always believed that women could succeed in any math or science career. Although not everyone agreed, she persisted, and she became the first American woman in space. That wasn't enough for Sally. She traveled into space once more and then created a science and engineering program specifically for girls that could help generations of young women achieve their dreams, both on Earth and in the stars. When, as a kid, Florence Griffith Joyner visited her father in Mojave Desert, he would urge her to run faster and faster, to run as fast as a jackrabbit. Even when she had to leave college to help support her family, she persisted in her training on the track, and then went back to school and got faster and faster. Her unbroken world records in the 100-meter and 200-meter sprints set the 1988 Summer Olympics, and she was the fastest woman ever. Still unbroken. Oprah Winfrey's grandmother expected Oprah to follow in her footsteps and become a maid. Oprah knew even as a little girl that her dreams would take her somewhere else. She persisted in turning those dreams into her reality and became a media superstar, working in movies and books and magazines and theater, and most of all, television, where the Oprah Winfrey Show remains the highest rating show of all time. Watching fictional judges on television inspired Sonia Sotomayor to want to be a real-life judge when she grew up. She knew she had to speak English as well as she spoke Spanish, study hard in school, and manage her diabetes before she could one day wear a judge's robe. She persisted, eventually becoming a Supreme Court justice and the first ever Latina to sit on the America's highest court. So, if anyone ever tells you no, if anyone ever says your voice is not as important as anyone else's voice, or your dreams are too big, remember all these women. They persisted, and so should you. All right, thank you. Now is the time in our service where we pause for our morning offering. Alice Alicia Nasman says, let us take this moment to honor the ancestors of this church. The people who first came together to create a home for liberal religion right here in Pottstown, who worked to raise money for a building, who sat in committee meetings, created bylaws, who chopped and marinated and baked potlucks, who painted and weeded and pounded nails and washed countless dishes, who gathered to worship and learn and breathe and heal and serve and build justice and transform their lives and this world. We are the recipients of an incredible gift and a beautiful vision. Let's do our part to keep this congregation strong and vital and thriving for generations to come. Thank you so much for the morning offering, which is given in a spirit of generosity and received with gratitude to God. So the reading this morning is called Craving My Work, and it's by Jakaran Oya, Olga Oya. I knew I was going to stumble over that, sorry. This was written in 2022. Come celebrate with me as that every day something has tried to kill me and failed. That's a quote from Lucille Clifton, What You Celebrate with Me, from the Book of Life. Jakaran writes, I spent most of the last year writing poetry as a spiritual practice, and as an outlet to express collective grief and hope for the future in the year of the pandemic. I shared my poems a few times a week on my Facebook page, happy to connect with my community during a time when I felt isolated. I know everyone was reaching out during that time, trying to figure out a way to feel less isolated. Well, on the more popular poems, I noticed people leaving questions. Who wrote this? It's really good. Or, did you write this? It seemed flattering on the surface, I thought. They thought my poems were good. They thought they were so good I couldn't possibly have been the writer. This couldn't be my work. This had to be written by someone else, not me. These thoughts haunted me as I wrote. I questioned whether my identity as a Black woman was the catalyst for the question. Black and brown people are often met with surprise and disbelief in their work, as if they are inherently incapable of spiritual connection and depth. I dreamed of writing a book of poetry in 2020. For every poem I shared, I had another that was reserved just for publication. Ignoring the spiritual and emotional connections I cultivated in my life, I started to lean into it, saying that my poetry was divinely inspired, a separation of me from my work. And then I started to share fewer of my poems until I stopped sharing entirely, and eventually stopped writing them. If the work was good enough to be viewed as good, but wasn't good enough to be my own, why share it? Stopping my spiritual practice of writing was a separation of myself from spirit, a separation that led me to question my own worth and dignity. It finally occurred to me that recognizing my work, that doubting my work was not a personal attack, it was a defense. Recognizing that I was a writer meant acknowledging me as an equal, a privilege that was not extended to Black people often, and only as early as 1964, when the Civil Rights Act established anti-discrimination laws and voting rights. But I affirm I am worthy of being good enough to touch hearts and souls, to connect others to the Spirit. That worthiness is in each of us, inherent, and we can embrace and safely feel all the feelings that come up: pain, rejection, heartache, longing, love, hope. We don't have to doubt goodness. And she closes with a prayer. Divine Spirit, it is so easy to throw up a shield of protection in the form of doubt, but that doesn't lead to growth or connection. Help us to realize that being vulnerable is a gift. We don't have to doubt the worth of others nor ourselves when we are reflected out in the world. So I thought that would be a good way to lead into our community ancestor, Olympia Brown. So if you read the blurb, Olympia Brown was a Unitarian pioneer. She was not just the first woman to become a Unitarian minister, but the first woman ordained as a minister in the entire United States. Although she wasn't the first woman to actually have passed all of the requirements. She was just the first woman to convince somebody to ordain her. Sometimes I'm afraid we're walking backwards. Sometimes I'm afraid that that grand arc of history is not bending gently towards justice like a rainbow whose ends we cannot see, but rather it's like a trebuchet or maybe a catapult that's under tension and just waiting for someone to cut that rope and fling us backwards. Or maybe it's like that stone of Sisyphus and we're rolling it up the hill only to have it roll down again the next day. You know, I read once that all of those restrictions on women that were written into Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale were things that actually happened in real life somewhere in the world. And then I went and I was like, no, that can't be true. And I looked up an interview with Margaret Atwood where she was like talking to somebody from Penguin Putnam, who was her publisher. And they were going through a box of her newspaper clippings. And what Atwood said was, oh yeah, I didn't even research it. There was no internet. You couldn't just, go online and pull up a topic. So this is just the stuff I came across when reading newspapers and magazines. I would cut them out and put them in a box. She wasn't even looking for it. It was just things that were happening. I already knew what I was writing about, and this was backup. In case someone said, how did you make this up? As I've said about 1 million times, I didn't make it up. This is the proof. Everything in these boxes, and there were boxes. So that moved me to despair. But when I am in despair about the direction of the world, I can look to pioneers like Olympia Brown. So Olympia Brown was born on January 5th, 1835. She was the oldest daughter of Asia and Lethia Brown. Asia and Lethia were originally from Vermont, and they were from fairly well-to-do families, and they decided some of their family members had emigrated to Michigan, so they decided to follow and emigrate to Michigan as well. And Asa bought a farm out there, and it was it was near the village of Schoolcraft, and it wasn't far from Lethia's sister Pamela. So Lethia was happy to go out there because at least she had family there. And Olympia had fond memories of growing up on the farm. She would grow up as she was the oldest girl, and as she was growing up, she was allowed to run and play, which was not encouraged for young ladies at the time. Like, female girls were encouraged to be young ladies. Young gentlemen were boys shall be boys. And she thought that that was not right when she came across it. But farming was very difficult. Everyone in the family worked hard. Even as a child, Olympia was expected to sweep and dust and wash dishes, tend the fire, make the butter, make the cheese, milk the cows. They lived for the first few years of her life in a one-room cabin. And it was partitioned off so that the family had a separate place from the farm workers, but everyone was in one room. After the birth of her younger sister Oella, and at the insistence of her mother Lethia, who was not going to raise a third child in a one-room cabin, the family built a modern 1840s farmhouse that had a parlor and sitting room and a dining room and a kitchen, a modern kitchen, not just a hearth fire, and all the bedrooms upstairs. And Olympia thought this was a palace in comparison to her old house. After Oella came Marcia and then Arthur, and Olympia was often tasked with watching over them. And they would roam the whole countryside, picking wild raspberries and blueberries and cranberries, and tending the garden and doing the chores. And among the formative things in Olympia's life, she was close to her aunt and uncle, Pamela and Thomas Nathan. Pamela and Thomas Nathan ran a stop for the Underground Railroad out of their house. And that work was secret and dangerous at the time. And Olympia learned a lot about oppression by speaking with people who escaped from slavery as they came through. Olympia's mother, Lethia, was a Universalist, although there was no church out where they were too far up to be near any churches. But she believed that God's love was for everyone and that all people created were equal. And Lethia passed these beliefs down to her children. So Olympia was astonished when she heard from the former slaves that people would be considered lesser simply due to the color of their skin. She was also puzzled by the fact that enslaved people were never allowed to go to school. When Olympia's uncle wrote an autobiography a few years later, he made no mention of the almost 1,500 people that he and his wife had helped escape to Canada. And when Olympia asked her Aunt Pamela about it, Aunt Pamela was reported to have said, end quote, "Well, Olympia, I suppose your Uncle Thomas just plain forgot about it." And why shouldn't he? He didn't do the washing or the cooking or the cleaning. That explains why I remember it better than he does. And when Olympia asked why her uncle hadn't then given Pamela credit for helping all of these escaped people get to freedom, she's like, the women get very little credit for what they do in this world, which is something you will have to accept when you grow up and start making your way in the world. Olympia's mother, however, did not agree with Pamela. She was a staunch believer in education and equality. Asa decided to build a schoolhouse for the children who were outside of the village near where they were. Although I'm not sure it was Asa decided or it was Lethia told Asa he decided. So Asa built a little school village, hired the teacher, arranged for the teacher's room and board with all the families in the area, and collected a small fee from each family to pay the teacher's salary. That was how things were done this was right after statehood for Michigan. And public education was something that everyone had as a right, but not every community felt like investing the time and money and energy in making a community school. But Olympia loved to learn. In their little schoolhouse, girls and boys were educated equally in all things, and in their household, their mother and father encouraged them to read and discuss articles in the news. They actually got a newspaper from back east. They got like the precursor to the New York Times was taken out to Michigan for them. And the newspaper would bring tidings of the outside world, but Olympia herself had never been outside of Michigan until she was 10, when the family took a trip to see Lethia's parents in Vermont. And travel really opened up Olympia's world. It connected her to her family. She had never met most of her family from back east because travel was so rough. They actually ended up traveling through, on their way to the Erie Canal, they traveled through this one section of the trail where it was so muddy that there were like carcasses of, not really carcasses, but there were these wagons that had broken and couldn't be pulled through the mud, like they were sunk halfway in the mud because it was so muddy and rutted that people had to abandon their wagons. They couldn't get them out. So that's how hard it was to travel back then. But they took their whole family of 6, the mom, dad, and the 4 kids, all the way to Vermont from Michigan. When they were traveling on the Erie Canal, there were separate cabins for women and children and for men. And Olympia asked her mom, "Mom, why do the men get a nice cabin?" The cabin for the women and children was this small, dingy, cramped cabin in the corner. And the men had a very nice, well-appointed, upholstered cabin. And she said, "Oh, well, honey, I think there's just a lot more male travelers than there are women and children traveling right now." But Olympia did not forget how unfair that felt, those traveling conditions. So when the summer ended and the family returned home, the world seemed a little bit smaller, and so did her little home. And she outgrew the village school. So by the time she was 14, she had learned just as much as the teacher already knew. So she felt like she was ready to go to school in the village, which her dad initially said, "Well, why do you need to do that if you're just going to get married?" She's 14. And she said, "Oh, well, I think that if I wanted to be able to support myself, I should get at least a good enough education that I could be a rural teacher, like the teachers that you've brought into our little village." And her dad said, "Okay," and let her go to school. So in the village school, boys and girls were given different curriculums and different expectations. Girls, for example, were not allowed to participate in debates. And Olympia thought this was very unfair. She had a lot of ideas. She wanted to share them. She wanted to debate, and she thought that some of her ideas were much better than boys' ideas. So she convinced her friend Addison to bring up a debate topic. The debate topic was, girls should also be allowed to debate. And instead of these educators saying, "Why, that's a wonderful idea. We agree that all people should have their minds expanded. That's what education is for." All of the teachers said, "If you do that, we will leave." And so, stepping right in, Olympia said, "Oh, sorry, that was a joke." But she was troubled that educated people, who should presumably know better, could believe that the mental capacity of men and women could be so different. So with the education she received at that larger village school, Olympia was qualified to become a rural teacher. Well, the pay for rural teachers was not good, and she didn't feel like she really had a calling to teach. Like, she went home, she taught at her village school, and she did not have a calling for it. So she searched for an institute of higher learning that would accept women. And the way that she convinced her father of this, like to pay for her and her younger sister to go to this institution of higher learning, she said, "Oh, well, I could be a rural teacher here, but the pay is much higher in the cities, and I'm not really qualified to be a city teacher, but I think that we could make a much better living as a city teacher. So I think that we should be allowed to have more education." And her father said, "Okay." And so she learned of this place called Mount Holyoke, which was an institute of higher education that was created specifically for girls and women. And she convinced her father to allow both her and her sister, Oella, to attend. And they went, and I'm just going to read you some of the rules. This is from a contemporary of Olympia. Some of the rules at Mount Holyoke. "It is against the rules of this seminary to send papers, to throw anything out of the window, to speak above a whisper in any of the halls, to stop long enough to count to 10, to purchase any eatables anywhere else, to leave your room during study hours, to enter any person's room except at about 3 particular hours of the day, except for recreation day, to make any communication in seminary hall, to get up before 5 o'clock or after 6 o'clock, to go to bed after 10, to write anything on any part of the building, to be tardy at second at the table or any exam." That was awful. "To go out of the house, to not go out of the house after tea without permission, to make calls without permission, You have to check your lamps. You can't sit on your bed. You can't step on your chair without a paper. You can't look out the window. Yeah, that one they very much disagree with. And when the bell rings, you have to retire, you have to get up when the bell rings, you have to start working when the bell rings, you have to leave off working when the bell rings, you have to go to the table and take your seats when the bell rings. And from 10 to 2 a.m. and I'm sorry, from 10 to 12 a.m. and 2:15 to 3:15 p.m. you can't speak to anyone at all. Silent study hours, must be silent. So most of the students really did complain about not being able to look out of the windows. Why have them? So very strict. And Olympia and Noella, they were not happy about the strict rules, but they thought, well, at least we will be getting a good education. And before they came to Mount Holyoke, part of the thing that they did was they decided they were going to study at home so that they could pass those first year of exams, because they thought, they were really close to being able to pass those anyhow, and they would just move to the second year of exams. Well, they brought this up to the board, and the board said, why no, you can't pass the exams early, you have to do the course of studies just as it is laid out. So they insisted that the girls would take each class in its entirety, regardless of any prior knowledge of the subject. And despite the feeling that they were wasting time and money and energy, the girls decided to stay rather than return to the family farm. And rather than make a waste of the entire year, they availed themselves of the school library and studied on their own in things that they were interested in, like mathematics and Latin and Greek. And they organized a literary society so that girls could learn speech and debate, because Olympia was determined to learn speech and debate. Well, they were able to do this speech and debate club for quite a while, and finally some teachers decided they were going to attend this speech and debate club to see what went on. And they attended the speech and debate club and disbanded the union. And what they said was, it's teaching you too much independence of thought. The restrictions on their time and activities and intelligence were not the only restrictions at Mount Holyoke. The school was also a deeply religious institution that sought to convert its students to a particular type of Christianity that was honored by the institution's founder, Mary Lyon. Those religious principles were different from Olympia's own faith, which was Universalist principles. So the school taught a hell and brimstone version of Christianity, and it didn't square with Olympia's understanding of a loving universalist God. Olympia wrote about this to her mother, and her mother gave her some counsel. Her mother responded, "My dear Olympia, I have thought of you much since I received your last letter, and with a feeling of anxiety and uneasiness unusual when you were the subject of my thoughts. The more I've reflected on the subject and tone of your letter, the greater has seemed its significance. You ask for commentaries on the Bible, and say you do not wish to get fooled into this church. Allow me to say, my dear, that under the influence that surrounds you there, it would be impossible for you to come to any just conclusion upon a subject so mystified by creeds and theologians, particularly a person of your enthusiastic and impressionable temperament. While there is no faculty of the human soul so elevating, so delightful as pure devotion of feeling, there is nothing so benumbing, so deadening, so baneful as a narrow soul-constricting creed. It is absurd to judge the Almighty at his disposal of the human race from some text or scripture or particular wording of some phrase." She went on to explain that the Bible could be subject to misinterpretation and advised Olympia to read a Bible on her own. And so Olympia wrote to the Universalist Society in Boston and asked them for a list of books that she should read and a course of study that she should do to learn about the Bible. And after reading what the Universalists had to say, she decided Mount Holyoke was not for her, and she did not go back to complete her term now. However, she wasn't done with learning. So she had to convince her dad once again to send her to another school. But by this point, her dad had realized, her father knew that Olympia was never going to be satisfied without having a good education. And she said, Olympia, if you can find a college that will accept you, you can attend it. So there were few colleges. She wrote lots of letters to see if anyone would accept her for a course of study. And she got very few acceptances. Most of them just rejected her out of hand simply because she was female. But she settled on Antioch College in Ohio. To Olympia's relief, Antioch had none of the rigorous restrictions of Mount Holyoke. However, there were still instances of discrimination. For example, in her English class, young men were expected to orate from memory, whereas young women were expected to read off of a manuscript. As a quiet defiance, Olympia would bring her manuscript up to the front, rolled in a tube, hold it in her hands, and orate her speech. Give it right from memory. And when she was challenged on this, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. She said, I'm doing exactly what the boys did. She was so determined that women were as able to speak and as deserving of being heard as men, that she organized a movement to have Antoinette Brown, no relation to her, come and speak at Antioch. Antoinette Brown had completed the theological course at Oberlin College, but had been denied her ordination by the administrators there. And that, incidentally, is why Olympia decided not to go to Oberlin, because she already knew somebody tried Oberlin and she couldn't get ordained. Olympia was moved by both Brown's speaking and by Brown's story. And she also began to feel a call of her own to the ministry. Upon her graduation from Antioch, she announced to her family that she would like to become a minister. And her father once again said, all right, sweetheart, you can find an institution that will accept you. We will pay for you to go to become a minister. Well, letter after letter were sent from the Michigan farm, and denial after denial came back. But eventually, Olympia was accepted to St. Laura's Theological School in Canton, New York, as the sole female student in the school. Upon her arrival, Olympia was prepared to be treated as a pariah, and that's what she was used to. However, with the exception of two troublesome students who later left the school, the students and the faculty were all very respectful and very supportive of her true desire to learn. The thing was that the wives of the faculty members were inclined to be dismissive of her. You would think that they would be supporting her, like, oh, wow, she's trying to do something amazing. And instead it was, but after they got to know her and got to know how earnest she was in the way that she wanted to really share the love of God, they grew warmer in their treatment of her. And Olympia knew that she had to, in order to be considered as a minister, she had to be able to public speak. So she went all around Canton and she would find different pulpits that would allow her to speak. And she was actually well loved and often invited back in all these pulpits. She actually didn't go home to Michigan between her first year and her second year. She just stayed in New York doing circuits of various towns and doing public speaking to improve her skills as an orator. And when she completed her studies, becoming ordained was the next hurdle. She was a strong orator. She had excellent ideas. In fact, all of her teachers said, your sermons are so strong and so wonderful to listen to. And she was welcomed at all of those regional pulpits. However, the administrators at St. Lawrence did not want to ordain. But she persisted. Olympia learned that the Northern Universalist Association was meeting in Malone, New York. So she arranged to travel the 50 miles to Malone to plead her case. And her case was essentially that any man with the same qualifications as her would be ordained without any questions whatsoever. Well, on her way to Malone, she had been invited to speak at the pulpit in Wavleton, New York. And a member of that church was a delegate at the Northern Universalist Association Council and heard her speak and understood that she was not exaggerating her claim, that anyone who had the kind of ability and the kind of knowledge that she had, if they were a man, there would be no question. So when the council called her in for their decision, the chairman said simply, "Ms. Brown, we have agreed to ordain you. Let us set the date now for your ordination ceremony." Yay. They agreed that the date, June 25th, 1863, and Olympia, rejoicing in her victory, returned to St. Lawrence with the news. And her teachers at St. Lawrence were a little shocked that she actually did it, but they were very supportive, and they actually arranged to have the ordination right there at St. And that's how the first woman came to be an ordained minister in the United States. Olympia Brown was an extraordinary woman who would not be dissuaded from her goal. She persisted. So when I am doom scrolling or collecting my own Margaret Atwood style box of horrible proof that people can be cruel, I can remember that there is an even bigger box that's full of examples of kindness and determination to make the world a better place. And I can dig through that box. And I hope that you all can have a box just like that. So please join me in singing hymn number 131 in the great hymnal, "Love Will Guide Us." And this hymn was written by contemporary performer Sally Rogers. It has a traditional tune arranged by Betty A. Wilder. But the reason I picked it is because it is called, the tune name, if you look in the corner, the one in block printer, it's called Olympia, and it's named after Olympia Brown. Now, if you please join me in reading our chalice extinguishing words. We extinguish the chalice flame, but not the light of wisdom, or of the community, or the light of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and in our hands until we are together again. And we'll close today with a quote from Olympia Brown's speech to the Literary Society at Antioch College. This was when she was an alumnus. "Go out into the world and do your best in whatever job you might find. Maintain your rights at all times and never compromise your principles. You can succeed in spite of great difficulties. You must put your minds and your talents to work and maintain a spirit of determination and independence. Amen, shalom, salam, blessed be, and let's have coffee."
That's